Sasha Thompson is a highly respected DEI expert and certified coach. She and her network of friends in the DEI profession often talk shop after work. They're bringing those after hours conversations to you right here on DEI After 5 with Sasha. Let's get this conversation started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of DEI After 5. I am so excited about today's conversation because my guest today is my sister friend, Katrina Jones. We are just going to go ahead and jump in and get started. Welcome, Katrina.
Hi, thank you, Sasha. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm
Oh, my
so
goodness.
excited to be here, so excited to be reunited with you every time we get together.
Yes. Well, today we are really talking about, how do you detach from toxic environments?
Yeah.
Um, we both know what that's about, how that is.
Yes.
And so, really wanted to spend this time kind of talking to you about that experience and some of the things that you were able to do as a practitioner
Yeah.
in this work, because I think that's what makes it so difficult. It's not, it's part of your job, right? Like it's part of your job to try to reach out and speak for those that don't have a voice. But then when you find that that becomes you, it becomes much more difficult. So talk to us a little bit about your experience and some of the things that you learned through that
Yeah.
process.
So, I came, and I'll say came back to this idea of detachment. And I say came back because, I was first introduced to the principle of detachment, the framework of detachment through Alateen. As a child, there was a loved one that I was very close to who was in recovery. And so I used to go to Alateen. I knew all the steps with Al-Anon. And so it was in this last, I'll say, couple of years where this idea of detachment kept resurfacing in my life. And it came up in a few different ways. First, from a mental health, wellness practitioner that I used to see who suggested this to me one time when we were in session that, I could perhaps just remove myself and not care so deeply about this work, and I'm saying work, but it's beyond, a current professional title. And I always say this about my work in DEI, that it is my life's work. And it's really hard, and it is the most meaningful, most profound work I think that you can do in this life, um, or some of the most. I'll say that. But I when that practitioner initially introduced or reintroduced detachment, and not with that exact language, but just not being so connected, I just immediately rebuffed that because I thought, no, I can't do that, right? Like this work is too important, and I don't want to be detached from the work or from my environment. This is more than just a job, and this is more than just a career arc for me. Um, and it planted a seed. That planted a seed where I got to think about, well, hold on, what does that mean, right, for you? And does it have to look exactly like what that practitioner person was suggesting? Um, and so it led me to actually go back and go pull out the principle of detachment as articulated by Al-Anon. And when I did, it resonated so deeply, and I just want to
Um,
share the definition of it
okay.
because we can level set on what we mean when we talk about detachment. So I mentioned detachment as a principle and a framework in Al-Anon and Alateen, and it's essentially about separating yourself emotionally, from the effects of someone's behavior and actions. And then, in particular case, in the way that it's used within Al-Anon spaces, it means separating yourself from the effects of someone's behavior that's affected by alcoholism, right? And so if you Google it, you'll come up with, the kind of guidelines for detachment. But, when I read it, I just honestly, I had a spark of genius in thinking about how might this apply to me in separating, yes, from, unhealthy environments, after you've left the environment, but also separating, even when you're in the environment.
That's the piece I wanted to talk to you about, because so many of my clients that are practitioners, that's the big struggle, right? Yeah. Because they feel like in a lot of this work, right, they're not just advocating for others, they're advocating for themselves, yeah. Especially if they're from marginalized communities. And so how do you detach from this work emotionally, right, if you're using those principles, when it's so much a part of who you are?
Yes. And that, I think, you hit on something that is what makes the work so challenging. Like I always say, doing the work while you are the work. So this doesn't stop for me when I close my laptop. This is me. This is how I live my life. It is a part of my everyday in terms of, fighting against racism, against sexism, of also navigating racism and sexism on a daily basis in a way that's so loud, right? And sometimes subtle, but often really loud. I mean, we could just look at last week where the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery were found guilty, and that was wonderful. And prior to that, a few days or a week prior to that, Kyle Rittenhouse had been found not guilty. And so those are public moments that affect people, and folks are also having these experiences in their everyday life that they're dealing with, and that is beyond. I have to say, it is beyond, because it's hard to separate yourself. I do think with detachment, and what I love about this, as I started to pick it apart and revision it for my life and for myself, is it really made me think about what would life be like for me if I didn't have to deal with the constant specter of racism. And so how could I use detachment as a principle, as a framework, to let go of and some of the emotional turmoil, and and tumult that comes in dealing with the symptoms of racism. And that's, I think, the power is in it. It is in refocusing or focusing exclusively on yourself, on your well-being, on your success, and most importantly, your peace, right? And so, which is what the detachment really is about. It is about how yes, there is all this stuff that can happen, that happens to you, or it happens in the environment, and how do you sit outside of that? Because one of the illustrations of detachment says that it's neither kind nor unkind. It requires you to sit without judgment, to see it, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't have a reaction. You might see something, you observe it, you have a feeling about it, you might have an initial judgment, and then you set that aside. And that is what I think will really help and support professionals who are doing this work, especially doing this work when they are the work.
Yeah. I mean, what you just said made me think of sometimes you just have to let go,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean that you don't care.
Nope.
But something you just have to let go, because that anger, frustration, whatever that emotion is, can start to take over
Yes.
and manifest in your body, in certain ways. And we've talked about this a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
when I detached, like it
Yes.
was truly this emotion of, okay, what do I need in order to acknowledge what has happened, but not hold on to it, not live in that moment. And I
Yes.
think that's the piece that I think a lot of people need to start to realize or recognize in this work is you have to do those things in order to acknowledge and then say, okay, this isn't feeding me well. And so
Yeah.
what do I need in order to do that? And so as you think about this in your journey, and we've talked a million, a million times about
Yes.
this.
Yes.
But what were some of the steps that you took to start detaching?
Oh gosh. For me, it was being conscious of and shifting. I'll say being conscious of the feeling, the judgment that I was having, and then being intentional about shifting away from it.
Mm,
Right. What I would do would be to stay in the space of the feeling, the judgment, the emotion, and you know cycle through that. So
yeah.
instead of moving to the next, stepping away from it or seeing it and then, stepping outside of it, I just kept cycling through it. And to be clear, um, it's not a bad thing that that happens and that you might do that because it it's something that is so natural for us, especially when you've experienced, paper cuts that have compounded into wounds over time
Mm,
that never heal, right?
hmm.
It is really hard to then step outside and step away from that cycle, that vicious cycle of
Yeah.
staying in the feeling, ruminating in it, and staying with that judgment that you've assigned.
And there's two things you just said. One, I think we also need to step back and determine or identify what are the things that have caused those cuts,
Yeah,
right? Rather than going through the cycle and getting cut over and over again, like, okay, what are the things that are cutting me
yeah,
and where are the traumas happening? And
yeah,
being able to identify also your triggers, right?
yeah,
Like, what are those things? Because I know one of the challenges that I had getting out of a toxic environment was I loved the people that I worked with
yes,
and I stayed connected to them. Then my wounds never really healed because that scab was constantly being picked off,
yes, because
right?
you're still in it, right?
Cycling.
People are coming and saying, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe this latest thing," or "This is a tragic." Like, let me just download and just give you the news at 5 all.
Right.
And so it's really, and I think the other part that you just hinted at is establishing boundaries. So
Yeah.
that was part of it too. So step one for me was being intentional about acknowledging what I was feeling, about honoring that feeling, the judgment that I was having, and holding that as a precious gift and then saying, okay, thank you. I'm going to put you over here now. It's time for you to move, for me to move elsewhere. And so I did that. And the other part of it was establishing boundaries to say, this isn't, for example, this isn't a healthy conversation for me to engage in. I'd love to talk about how you're doing, right? I'd love to talk about, what you're up to. How's your family? And shifting, uh,
Yeah.
shifting to something else, another topic, and also where you need to setting boundaries about your relationships with people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that's one of the reasons why coaching became such a critical part of the work that I do, particularly for practitioners, because I started going into coaching mode, right? Like rather than letting people stew in the complaints, it's like, okay, well, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Yes.
Right. And I would start throwing these questions out that would have them thinking like, okay, wait a minute, did I just go through a session? Because
Yes. Oh, yes.
but you need to move forward. And so I found that I was talking to a lot of practitioners in this coaching method to get them to move forward and to stop that spinning,
Yes.
right? Or at least if it was an iteration, they realized, okay, this isn't where I want to be. So what do I need to do in order to get to, where it is that I want to be? So, you've talked about, setting boundaries and kind of understanding also your limitations too, to some extent of what you can take in. If there was one thing that you wish you would have learned earlier in the process, what would that been? What would that have been?
Oh gosh. We don't have enough time. No. I think the one thing that I wish I would have learned earlier was that I could not. So, part of the reason, and I've now, working within my own business and working with clients and advising and consulting on DEI strategies, programs, and also, leading and facilitating a lot of education, a lot of workshops. And in part of that, one of the things that I've, just become really cognizant of that I wish I had learned earlier was that I am not a vessel for someone else's, I can't. And yes, I've got tremendous expertise. I've got a very unique and special skill set. It's what makes me so, great at my work, and especially working with clients who are ready to do this work. And I can't be a vessel for somebody else's journey. And I think there is often a tendency, right? You want to save, you want to help, you want to support, you want to empower people, you want to um, you've got your superhero cape on all the time. And I just really had to recognize that I cannot be a vessel for someone else's anti-racism journey or their recovery from racism and the other isms that they're experiencing. That I could certainly provide expertise. I can provide, counseling, advising, coaching, but I was not responsible for their failure or their success in that journey or for any aspect of that journey.
Yeah. I think I'm taking that in because I think that was a lesson that I had to learn. I also had to learn that, and I learned this early on, but not everyone is in the same place in their journey. And so I always describe it as, practitioners, a lot of practitioners, not all practitioners, are what I would call, at that PhD level, right, of this work.
Yes.
And we have to realize that there are some folks that are still in pre-K.
Yes.
That may have higher titles.
Yeah.
But this is the very beginning of their journey. Like they're just now at Sesame Street learning their alphabet, right? Like they're learning what is D, what is E, what is I. And I had to kind of get through that frustration of understanding that not everyone is at the same place in this journey, and knowing who I could work with, what part of the journey was best for me to work with.
Oh, yes. That, because everybody starts from someplace, right?
Yeah.
So I always say this, no, we're not born like, well, right? Like super woke. We all, and that's part of that expertise that we've cultivated is being in this from an academic, educational, but practical standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, engaging in all of the learning, the knowledge, etc. And there's no end point to the journey. It's not that you get to a certain spot and you say, okay,
I'm done. Yep.
I'm C level, right? Like I got my doctorate, I'm good.
No.
You are always learning. And so, looking at it and seeing it in that way, I think allows you to honor where other people are in their journey. It doesn't mean that folks aren't accountable or not accountable for their mistakes, or for any harm that they may intentionally or unintentionally perpetuate, but it is honoring that everybody starts somewhere, that everybody, hopefully is moving along in their journey. And we are all on one.
Yeah. And, the aha I had with that was part of the toxicity I was dealing with were people in leadership roles that were in pre-K,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In their journey. And it was recognizing that, and realizing, okay, I have to come about this in a different way, but also do so in a way that is not where the toxicity isn't poisoning my spirit.
Yes.
My soul. And so that was a balancing act, particularly, toward the end of my time. But
yeah.
What I also realized, and you talked about it a little bit, was, you can't be a vessel, right, for everyone in everyone's journey. And there's so much of this work for practitioners. Like, we give so much to so many people.
Yes.
And, it's a constant give, and it's a constant, I don't want to say it's taxing, but it is taxing to some degree emotionally, if you are truly invested in this work. And so, one of the pieces of this that, I always talk to my clients about is, who's filling you up? Like, how do you fill you up? And so, as we talk, I'm always just like, okay, what are you sipping on? What are you drinking? And, today I have coconut water because
hydrate, like, yes, that
hydrate.
is ultimate refuel.
Right. But, and it's because it's the refuel. There's comfort in that for me for some reason, right? Coconut water. And so the question I have, like, what do you do to fill your cup?
This is a great question. And by the way, I'm 150% with you on coconut water. Like, when I drink water, and that's what's in my cup today. I have water with a splash of lemon because after lots of eating and drinking last week, like, I just want to
detox.
Be healthy. Be healthy. Like my 5-year-old says, be healthy, flush things out. And coconut water also is like fulfilling on a whole other level. Every time I drink coconut water, it feels like love. That's what it feels like. Like love is going into my body. I think for me, the way that I have refilled and tended to I'll call it tended to my garden. That's what it is really investing in lots of therapy, investing in, healthcare, honestly, going to the different doctors and making sure that I'm also, between therapy, general practitioner, between other doctors, that I'm really taking care of my physical health as well as my mental health. And part of that also has given me tools, right, where I'm more conscientious about what I'm feeling, what is surfacing for me, what it might be connected to. Often connected to something from your past, from your childhood. So being able to see those things more clearly has been incredible, honestly. And then, aside from just recognizing what I'm feeling, eh, through those different experiences, it's, for me, it's also about doing things, engaging in different, and it's little things. It's not like, okay, I make sure I go to the gym 5 days a week. I would love to do that. But the way that my sleep is set up, it just does not,
Right.
it does not come
Right.
together. But it's,
Yeah.
it's little things like I will go walk in the grass,
Mm.
because it literally helps ground me, and it is healing. It does something to me, spiritually, mentally, to feel the grass and the ground under my feet. And so sometimes I'll just go, take a few minutes, and I just go walk around barefoot. I go
Love
run
it.
out and go get the nail barefoot, because it's grounding. It's a
Mm.
reminder to me, of that I'm connected to the earth, right? That there's something much bigger than me.
You just
So,
reminded me, like I used to do that as a kid all the time.
oh
I would
yeah,
just go outside, or like there was this one little spot of the yard that was always just muddy.
yes,
And I just loved to play in that, even as a teen, would just
yeah,
love to squish my toes in the mud. And my mom was like, really? Like,
oh, oh,
loved
I'm a
it.
country girl at heart, and I had to remember that, right? Like, yeah, I used to do the same thing. I'd be walking around barefoot as a child, as a teen, all the time. I never wore shoes outside because, like,
Yeah.
why? Right? And it just it felt good, and that's all I knew as a child was this feels good, right? Like this is, I don't know why, but it feels good. So sometimes you just have to return to that of
And
doing.
that's why one of the main questions I always ask my clients is what brings you joy? Like, and it's not about work. It's just
Yes,
those little things. It's those little things that that make you smile, that you just love. Like a random one for me is I love jumbo marshmallows.
yes.
Like, don't ask me why, but I will eat like a whole bag of them and just be in my happy place.
But we
But it
we we
reminds me of my childhood, right?
yeah. I love toasted marshmallows, and it's one of my favorite. Like, oh, we have a guest. I'm toasting marshmallows. We also have a little fire. Yes. Oh, that
See,
gooiness. So it
yes, yes,
what brings you joy, what brings you peace, and
yeah,
focus on that. If it's, you find time to take a longer shower, a meditation. And for me, the trick is consistency, because I'll
yeah,
do it when I find myself in a hard spot. And I think the one of the other things that I've learned is I can't just pivot when I'm in a hard spot into all of these practices suddenly, because then I'm just throwing
yeah,
everything kind of at my systems, right? Like, take this
yeah.
meditation, take this walk in the grass, take this therapy session. But I need to for meditation, for instance, to be a regular practice. And so I would find ways to, I'm taking my meditation in the shower, right? Nobody said
Mm,
seated in a chair or
right.
anything like that. Taking a 5 minute, 10-minute walk with my dog, just all that. These are things that you have to have some consistency with, and figure out what is the one thing that you want to be more consistent with, and just give yourself that time.
Yeah, that's your you time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's your you time. So, Katrina, where could people find you?
So you can find me, my website, equityequationplus.com. So you can find me on my website, equityequationplus.com. You can also find me, and my website is still in the process
What,
of,
equity inclusion?
sorry, thank you.
I
Sorry,
was like, wait a minute,
right, sorry. And it's
we're
because,
connected. We're connected.
yes, yes. It's because I'm looking at it's equity. Thank you. Equityinclusion.com. You can also find me, and please sign up for updates to be on the mailing list. I am launching my website in early 2022, and would love for you to be part of this community. So please go to equityinclusion.com, sign up to receive updates. You'll be on the mailing list. You'll be notified as soon as the site goes live. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And if you're looking for a diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor, consultant, someone who can also facilitate education and learning, you can find me again on equityinclusion.com, on LinkedIn, but please get in touch. I'd love to work with you.
Yay! Thank you so much, Katrina, for joining me for this episode. This has been absolutely phenomenal. We could go on for hours because we have gone on for hours before. So thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to thank the audience. Thank you all for joining us as well, too. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Have a good one.
Thank you, Sasha.
Katrina.